Chapter 2. A long stone pier jutted out into the Atlantic Ocean from the town beach of Ogunquit, Maine. Today the pier reminded her of a gray, reproachful finger, and as Franny Goldsmith parked her car in the lot, she saw Jesse sitting on the edge of the pier, his silhouette silhouetted in the afternoon sun. Seagulls circled above him, a real-life portrait of New England. But Franny doubted that a single bird would dare defile the immaculate blue chambray shirt with white droppings. After all, they were dealing with a poet. She knew it was Jesse because his 10-speed bicycle stood against the back wall of the parking lot attendant's booth, chained to a metal handrail. Gus, a balding and plump city old-timer, was just appearing in the doorway to greet her. The fee for commuters was $1 per car, but Gus knew Franny was a local, and she often came here without a local resident sticker in the corner of the windshield. Well, of course I come here often, Fran thought. As a matter of fact, I got pregnant right here on this beach, about 12 feet from the high tide line. Dear lump, you were conceived on the beautiful coast of Maine, 12 feet from the high tide line and 20 yards east of the breakwater. The place is now marked with an X. Gus threw up his hand, displaying the peace sign. Your boy's on the very edge of the pier, Ms. Goldsmith. Thank you, Gus. How's it going? Smiling, the watchman circled the parking lot. A dozen or two cars, most of them with a white permanent resident sticker on the windshield. It's a little early for the influx of tourists, he replied. It was June 17th. Wait a week or two, and we'll make some money for the town, I'm sure we will. Unless you pocket it all, Gus laughed and went back to the booth. Franny rested her hand on the warm metal of her car, took off her tennis shoes and put on her rubber flip-flops. A tall girl with brown hair down to mid-back, wearing a light brown blouse. With a good figure. With long legs that often drew approving glances from the men. Upper class, I think they called it in fraternities. Just a looker. Miss College 1990, she had to laugh at herself here, but the laughter had a bitter aftertaste. You're pregnant, she said to herself, as if she were talking about a world sensation. Chapter 6. Esther Prynne breaks the news to Reverend Dimsdale of Pearl's imminent arrival. But it was not from Dimsdale, but from Jesse Ryder, 20 years old. A year younger than our heroine, little Fran. A college graduate student and a poet, which, however, was easy to guess from his immaculate blue chambray shirt. She stopped at the edge of the sand, feeling the heat burning the soles of her feet even through the rubber. The silhouette on the far side of the pier was still tossing small pebbles into the water. The thought that occurred to her was partly amusing, but generally disconcerting. He knows what he looks like from the outside, she thought. Lord Byron, withdrawn but not broken. Staying alone and looking out to sea, to where his native England lies. But I, an exile, may never, oh, hell. It was not so much the thought itself that upset Fran as her own state of mind to which the thought testified. Her young man, and after all, she thought she loved him, was sitting there in the distance, while she stood here and laughed at him behind his back. She walked down the pier, picking her way carefully among the protruding rocks and cracks. This old pier had once been part of a breakwater. Now most yachts and boats moored at the south end of town, where 3 marinas and 7 cheap motels had been built and life bustled all summer long. Franny paced slowly, struggling to come to terms with the idea that she might have fallen out of love with Jesse in the 11 days since she'd learned that she was, as Amy Lauder put it, a little pregnant. Well, after all, he'd brought her to this life, hadn't he? But he's not the only one, that's for sure. She was on the pill. That, as it turns out, is a piece of cake. You go to the campus health center, tell the doctor you're having painful periods and a rash on your skin. The doctor writes a prescription. In reality, he prescribes a month of sexual freedom. She stopped again, this time farther away from the shore, with waves running to her right and left. It occurred to her that the doctors at the outpatient clinic probably heard about painful menstruation and acne as often as the pharmacists heard about my brother asked me to buy these condoms, and probably even more often in recent years. It didn't cost her anything to just go to the doctor and say, "Give me the pill. I'm going to get laid." The age was right. Why the shyness? She looked at Jessie's back and sighed. The point was that shyness was becoming a way of life. And Franny moved on. Anyway, the pill hadn't worked. Someone in the technical control department at the good old Avril factory had fallen asleep at the wrong time. Or she'd forgotten to take the pill and then forgotten that she'd forgotten to do it. She silently walked over to Jessie and put her hands on his shoulders. Jessie, who was clutching the pebbles in his left hand and sending them into the depths of the Atlantic with his right, shrieked and jumped up. The pebbles scattered, and he nearly knocked Franny into the water. He almost fell headlong into the water. Laughing, Franny drew back, covering her mouth with her hands. Jessie, a well-built young man with fine gold-rimmed glasses, black hair, and correct facial features that, to the young man's eternal regret, could not express the sensitivity of his nature, turned around in a rage. "You have frightened the devil out of me," he roared. "Oh, Jess." She laughed. "Oh, Jess, I'm sorry, but it was so funny, really funny, we almost fell in the water." In indignation, he took a step toward her. She stepped back to keep her distance, tripped over a rock, plopped on her heel. Her jaws clenched together, biting her tongue. God, what a pain! And Franny stopped laughing all at once, as if her laughter had been snipped away with a knife. The very fact of this sudden silence, "Turn me off, I'm a radio." She found it even more amusing, and laughed again, even though her tongue was bleeding and tears of pain were streaming from her eyes. "Are you okay, Franny?" Jessie knelt down beside her, a look of concern on his face. "I love him after all," she thought with some relief. "Well, all the better for me." "Are you hurt, Fran?" "Only my pride is hurt." She let Jessie help her up. "And I bit my tongue. See?" She flicked her tongue at him, expecting to get a smile in return, but he frowned. "Jesus, Fran, you're bleeding." He pulled a handkerchief from his back pocket, looked at it doubtfully, and put it back. She imagines them walking hand in hand back to the parking lot, young lovers in the bright sunshine, with the crumpled handkerchief sticking out of her mouth. She greets a smiling, well-meaning Gus and says, "Do you do?" Franny laughed again, despite the fact that her tongue hurt badly and the taste of blood in her mouth made her a little groggy. "Turn around," she asked sternly. "I'm about to break the rules of decorum for young ladies." Smiling, he covered his eyes theatrically. Fran crouched down, leaning on one arm, leaned over the water and spat, bright red saliva. Again. And again. Finally her mouth seemed to clear, and she looked back and saw him peeking through her fingers. "I'm so sorry." "I'm such an idiot." "No," Jessie assured her, clearly meaning yes. "Why don't we find some ice cream somewhere?" she suggested. "You drive, I'll buy, it's settled." He got up himself, helped her up again. Fran spit again. "Bright red, I didn't take a bite, did I?" she asked apprehensively. "I don't know," Jessie replied cheerfully. "Or did you swallow it?" Her hand went to her mouth. "That's not funny, yeah." "I'm sorry." "You just bit it, Franny. Are there any arteries in the tongue?" Now, holding hands, they walked backward along the pier. Every now and then she spit saliva into the water. Bright red. She wasn't going to swallow blood. No, good. She squeezed his hand and smiled encouragingly. "I'm pregnant, you are. That's good. You know who I saw in Port Dash?" He stopped and looked at her, his face suddenly hard and very, very wary. The change made her heart ache. "What did you say?" "I'm pregnant." She smiled broadly at him and spat off the pier into the water. Bright red, good joke, Franny. He sounded uncertain. It wasn't a joke. He continued to stare at her. After a while they moved on. As they crossed the parking lot, Gus came out and waved at them. Franny waved back. Jessie did, too. They pulled into the Dairy Queen on Federal Highway 1. Jessie got a Coke and sipped it deeply while driving the Volvo. To Fran, he brought the ice cream she had ordered, Banana Boat Supremes. She sat leaning against the door, 2 feet away from Jessie, and spooned peanuts, pineapple sauce, and ersatz Dairy Queen ice cream. Did you know that the ice cream at Dairy Queen is mostly air bubbles? Did you know that? And a lot of people don't even realize it. Jessie looked at her and was silent. It's true, Fran continued. These ice cream dispensing machines actually sell air bubbles. That's why the ice cream at Dairy Queen is so cheap. We were told about this in business theory. There are lots of ways to skim off the cream. Jessie looked at her and was silent. So if you want real ice cream, you have to go to some place like Deering's Ice Cream Cafe, and there, she burst into tears. He moved over and put his palms around her neck. Franny, don't. Please, banana boot is dripping all over me. She continued to cry. The handkerchief reappeared and Jessie wiped away the drops of melted ice cream. By then the sobs had turned to sobs, banana boot supremes with blood sauce. Franny looked at him with reddened eyes. I can't eat any more. Sorry, Jess, you won't throw it away? Of course, he replied dryly. Taking the ice cream, he got out of the car and threw it in the trash can. He's got a funny walk, Fran thought, like he's been slapped hard in the one place guys are most sensitive. In a way, she supposed, he had indeed been hit there. But in retrospect, that was the gait she'd had after he'd taken her virginity on the beach. It was itchy between her legs, like diaper rash. Except you don't get pregnant from diaper rash. He went back and got in the car. Are you really pregnant, Fran? He asked sharply. I really am. How did this happen? I thought you were using protection. My guess is this. 1. Someone in the technical control department of the good old Avril factory fell asleep and didn't reject my packet of pills as it went down the conveyor belt. Or 2. The university canteen feeds guys some kind of sperm activator. Or 3. I forgot to take the pill and then forgot that I forgot. She smiled so sternly, feebly, dazzlingly at him that he recoiled a little. What are you so angry about, Fran? I was only asking. Well, I'll try to answer your question another way. On a warm April night, must have been the 12th, 13th or 14th, you inserted your penis into my vagina, had an orgasm and spewed your seed with millions of, stop it. He cut her off sharply. You mustn't, shouldn't what? Outwardly she managed to remain stone-cold calm, but fear stirred inside. Imagining this scene, she hadn't thought it would be like this. You shouldn't be so angry, he finished softly. I'm not going to leave you, good. And Franny held back her emotions. And in that moment, she could have ripped his hand off the steering wheel, squeezed it, and completely mended the rift between them. But she couldn't bring herself to do it. He had no right to expect her to comfort him, however unconscious and secret that desire might be. Franny suddenly realized that, one way or another, she would have to forget about fun and enjoyment for a while. The thought made her want to cry again, but she would not let her tears escape. Franny Goldsmith, Peter Goldsmith's daughter, was not going to sit in the parking lot of the Dairy Queen in Ogunquit and cry. So what are you going to do? Jessie asked, pulling out his cigarettes. What are you going to do? He flicked his lighter, and for a moment, while the cigarette smoke filled his lungs, she could clearly see the man and the boy struggling for control of the same face. Oh, shit. He blurted out, as I understand it, options are possible. She didn't wait for an answer to her question. We can get married and keep the baby. We can get married and give up the baby. Or we don't get married, but I keep the baby. Or, Franny, or we don't get married and I give up the baby. Or I'll have an abortion. Does that exhaust all the possibilities? Am I missing anything, Franny? Can't we just talk? We are talking. She flashed her eyes. You had your chance, and you said, oh, shit. Exactly your words. And I just laid out your options. Of course, I had time to think about them. You want a cigarette? No. It's bad for the baby, Franny, damn it, why are you yelling? She asked softly, because you're trying your best to drive me crazy. Jessie threw angrily. Then he pulled himself together. I'm sorry. I just can't accept that it's my fault, you can't. She looked at him, arching an eyebrow. Behold, the virgin in the womb shall receive. Why are you always making fun of me? You said you were on the pill. I took your word for it. You did? No. No. You didn't. But it doesn't change the case. It does, he agreed grimly, and threw the half-smoked cigarette out the window. What are we going to do? You keep asking me, Jess. I've already outlined the options as I see them. I thought you might have some thoughts. There's also suicide, but I'm ruling that out for the moment. So pick your favorite and let's talk about it. Let's get married, Jesse said with sudden determination. He looked like a man who had finally realized that the only way to untangle the Gordian knot was to cut it in half. Full steam ahead, and we'll put the whiners in the hold. No, she said. I don't want to marry you. It was as if his face were held together by invisible bolts. And suddenly they were turned back a turn and a half. Everything sagged immediately. And he looked so funny at that moment that she had to rub her wounded tongue against her rough palate to keep from giggling again. She didn't feel like laughing at Jesse. Why not? He asked. Fran, I need to think about why. I'm not going to let you drag me into a discussion of the reasons why I'm saying no to you, because they're unknown to me right now. You don't love me. There was resentment in his voice. In most cases, love and marriage are mutually exclusive. Choose another option. He was silent for a long time, twirling a new cigarette in his fingers, but did not light it. Finally he spoke. I can't choose another option, Franny, since you don't want to discuss this one. You want to shame me. That moved her a little. She nodded. Maybe you're right. For the last couple weeks, I've only been shaming myself. And now, Jess, you're acting like a typical student. If you get attacked by a mugger with a knife, you'll give him a seminar too. Oh, for God's sake, pick another option. No. You've already thought this through. Maybe I need some time to think about it, too. Okay. Okay. Would you mind driving us back to the parking lot? I'll drop you off and take care of some business. He stared at her in surprise. Franny, I biked here from Portland. I rented a room at a country motel. We were supposed to spend the weekend together, in your motel room. No, Jess. Things have changed. You just get on your bike and ride back to Portland. Let me know when you have any thoughts. You can take your time. Stop messing with me, Franny. No, Jess, you were messing with me. She snorted in a sudden, fierce fit of anger, and then he slapped her lightly on the cheek. Then, stunned, he stared at her. I'm sorry, Fran, I forgive you, she replied nonchalantly. Let's go. They were silent on the way to the parking lot at the town beach. Franny sat with her hands folded in her lap, watching the blue wisps of ocean flicker between the cottages built just west of the breakwater. They look like apartment buildings in slum neighborhoods, she thought. Who do they belong to, these structures, shuttered off from a summer that officially begins in less than a week? Professors at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Boston doctors. New York lawyers. And their size is nothing remarkable. The real estates on the coast are owned by people whose fortunes are measured in 7 and 8 figures. But when the owners get here, the lowest IQ on Coastal Street will be Gus, the parking lot attendant. Kids will ride 10-speed bikes like Jesse's, eat lobster with their parents, go to the Ogunquit Theater, stroll down Main Street in the warm summer twilight trying to pass for locals. Franny hung out the splashes of blue between the overlapping houses, aware that her eyes were once again clouded with a film of tears. A little white crying cloud. They pulled into the parking lot, and Gus waved to them. They waved back. I'm sorry I hit you. Jesse said deafeningly. I didn't mean to, I know. Are you going back to Portland? I'll stay here tonight and call you in the morning. It's your decision, Fran. If you decide to have an abortion, I'll scrape together the money. Is that a conscious pun? No, not at all. He went up to her and kissed her chastely. I love you, Fran. I don't believe you, she thought. I don't believe you at all now, but I accept your words favorably. It is well within my power. All right, she answered in an even voice, the Beacon Motel. Call me if you want to, okay? She got behind the wheel and suddenly felt very tired. Her bitten tongue ached terribly. He walked over to the bike hooked to the metal handrail. Turn to her, I'd really like you to call, she gave a fake smile, we'll see. Bye, Jess. Franny started the engine, turned around, and rode across the parking lot toward the highway that ran along the coast. She saw Jesse still standing next to his bike against the ocean, and for the second time that day she mentally accused him of knowing exactly what he looked like from the outside. But this time she felt a slight sadness rather than irritation. She drove on, wondering if she would ever be able to perceive the ocean the way she used to before all this happened. Her tongue still ached. Fran rolled the side window lower and spit. Clear saliva this time. The air was saturated with the salty smell of the ocean, the smell of bitter tears, to be continued.